I've lived through some of the worst kinds of trauma. Growing up, I experienced both physical and emotional abuse, and that led me to mental health misdiagnosis. And through that time, I experienced sexual abuse with two different men, and later that led me to physical illness that no one really understood, which led to a really prolonged period of 11 years of what is pretty severe medical trauma. So yeah, I've lived through some of the worst things I could have ever imagined, but I've also gone through a pretty wonderful and complex journey of healing those things, and it continues. I think that my trauma was trying to show itself since I was a very young girl, but nobody back then knew what trauma was. So I think when I developed mental health symptoms as a girl, that was my trauma decontextualizing through my mind and my emotional experience. Later, it wanted to show up through the body. So I became very, very sick. So my body started to shut down when I was 24. All of a sudden, one day, my gut literally stopped working, and I was very scared. I couldn't keep down any food or water. And so I went to hospital, and I spent about 2 weeks in hospital, and they did every test under the sun, and they couldn't figure out what was happening. And at that time, I developed this spindly-like rash on my stomach, and I lost about 10 kilos. But they sent me off and said, oh, well, you'll just have to figure it out. And I did. I had to wean myself back onto food and just live with this very strange gut. And I was doing okay. And then about a month later, it started to affect my nervous system in a deeper way. So all of a sudden, my right foot just dropped and I couldn't move it. And as a young woman who had previously been very healthy, that was terrifying. So again, I went off to hospital, and I was told that I had nerve damage and that I would never walk again. And during that day, all these bruises started to appear on my leg. So I was really terrified. And again, they just said, well, you'll have to deal with that. You'll have to deal with a life where you can't walk. And I thought, no, I'm not accepting that. And so with the help of this beautiful physio and craniosacral therapist, I was walking again in a couple of months. But the trauma kept trying to speak. So then my left foot stopped working. And there was a period of a number of years where my legs would intermittently work and not work. And then it got worse. Then it started to show up through pain. And the pain was really very severe. And over time, it affected every system in my body. So I had problems with my bones, osteopenia, I had fluid on my lungs, and my skin became very, very weak. So my trauma was trying to speak, but back then, nobody knew how to listen. For me, the healing journey was very complex. I tried everything. So I explored mainstream medicine and mental health. I explored complementary health, spirituality, and philosophy, trying to find a way to heal. But what I didn't understand was that what I was dealing with was trauma. And I didn't understand that I was dissociated. So all of the healing I was doing, it's like I was out there, because when you're dissociated, you're not in your body and you can't really feel the trauma. One day during a bodywork session, the therapist, who actually was not trauma informed, went a little bit too intensely into my stomach with bodywork. And all of a sudden, I was transported. I regressed back to the time of an experience of physical abuse. And it was so overwhelming. And in the session, I was having all these memories. My body was going crazy, but I squashed it all down because I was really scared and I didn't want to share with this therapist what was happening. So I squashed it all down. I left the session, and then I started crying and bawling for about 2 weeks. I just was inconsolable and having all of these flashbacks. But with that was a gift. There was this little voice inside me that said, you have to feel this now, Natalia, you have to process. And so I spent 4 months processing all of these memories and emotions that were living in various places of my body. And it was a very intuitive and non-directed process. I had to go in and I had to feel and move and cry and be terrified and be angry and be sad and all of these things. And after working for about 4 hours a day over 4 months, all of my symptoms were gone. So that's how I started. But of course, healing from trauma is so much more complex than that. During that time, I decided to stop all medications and treatments. So at the time, I was still having intravenous treatments every month. I was flying back to Australia for intravenous treatment, and I was taking 42 medications. And so against the doctor's advice, I just said, no, I don't want that life anymore. So I chose to just stop everything. So my body really went crazy into this deep state of healing crisis, and also it's like my body was trying to dispel everything, not just the trauma, but all of the medications that I'd been on too. So that was a piece. And because I was so very weak, I had to do a lot for my body. I had to learn how to look after my body and how to walk and swim and build my capacity to be alive. So I explored swimming, walking, yoga, Pilates, all of these different things. And the other thing that I realized I had to explore was my relationships. So for me, relationships was the last thing I looked into, but funnily enough, now when I work with clients, it's the first thing that we look into. So I learned that so much of my trauma had occurred in the context of harmful relationship, and it was coloring the way that I was experiencing relationships, not only with the people around me, but with the world at large, and also my relationship with myself. So I spent quite a number of years trying to understand what happened, why am I experiencing this way where I'm terrified or disempowered or unable to express. So the relational piece was a really very big one. A big part of healing was learning that it was safe to be here in this body and in this world, and that it was safe to express, it was safe to set a boundary, to say no, to ask for help. All of these things were such a big process. So the release work and the purging of the trauma was actually only a really small piece of the trauma healing itself.